Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back to another edition of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry. Anthony Jokey will not be with us on tonight's episode, but I do have Jack Duffin once again with me on for the podcast. Jack, how's everything going over there for you?
I'm good. It's still a weird old world, but NFL free agency, thank God, is keeping me sane. We might not have live sport, but it is keeping me busy. And to be fair, it's just as exciting as some of the NFL games I saw last season, so I can't complain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I seen somebody that I went to high school with yesterday, and they asked how I was because it's been a while since I've seen them, and I said, still adjusting to this whole new world that we're in. I mean, but yes, like you said, NFL free agency, all the trades that have gone on across the NFL. I mean, it has really filled that burden, of instead of just talking about the coronavirus, everything going on, like having football to talk about is really nice because that's the only thing that's been going on in the sports world essentially over the last couple of weeks. So it's really something that you could put the coronavirus aside and actually talk about something else to ease the tension and everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah, could you imagine dealing with the last 2 weeks and there's no NFL free agency to talk about because it got put back 2-3 months? It'd be boring as hell.
Yeah, definitely. And then yesterday, was supposed to be opening day for baseball, and it was disappointing because in Cleveland it was so nice. It was like between 65 and 70, sunny. Like it never happens for an opening day for the Indians, and it finally happened. And of course, there's no game, so that was a bummer. But like Paul always says, we're not here to talk about Indians. We're here to talk about the Browns. Jack. Last week's episode, myself and Anthony, we discussed the agreements of Jack Conklin, Austin Hooper, and Case Keenum and what they could bring on the field. But now we have details on the off the field stuff, their contracts. And I know you discussed this with Jake Burns on his podcast, which I truly recommend for everybody to go check out because Jack went into great detail on the Conklin and the Hooper deals. But Jack, just to touch base, like, how are these deals for the Browns on their end in terms of the salary cap and moving forward with their cap flexibility?
So they're quite interesting, and it's important to know when these deals start getting lobbed out there that take it with a pinch of salt almost, because you don't know the final cap numbers until everything's finalised, because stuff just gets moved around, and say you hear the announcement that so-and-so's getting this much cash in year one, or that cash and cap numbers, two different things. So if we look at, say, the Austin Hooper deal and just flicking it over the cap, I don't know if there's actually been a change to his contract, because they're now reporting it as a 5-year deal because there's a void year in. So I would have warned you, I'm going to throw this out there, but apparently it's actually structured very similar to the Conklin deal, and there's that 5th year which is voidable, which means effectively both Conklin and Hooper have 5-year deals on paper, which is actually 3 years for Conklin, 4 years for Hooper, but they are fully 100% effectively guaranteed, because to cut Hooper, according to this, in his 4th year, you're going to be paying so much money in dead cap that you're never going to do it. So what's that going to be? 7.5 million. So no, he is very, very safe as houses. They're not Case Keenum and Cousins style 100% guaranteed contracts of effectively everything's guaranteed. Just the way they're structured allows for 100% guarantee. So that's just something to keep in mind, that he is here no matter what.
For someone that's looking at, going to over the cap, and they look and see that, for instance, Jack Conklin, this cap number is $8 million, but then you've seen the reports that he was getting $20 million in year one. Explain that for someone that's not fully aware of how the cap works and how contracts work like that.
Yep. So there's mainly 2 different parts to a contract. So you've got the base salary. So, for instance, the base salary for Conklin in year one is $5 million. And then you've got the signing bonus. So the way the signing bonus works is it's equally split over the first 5 years. So, or up to 5 years. So if we'd have done a 3-year deal, that 15 million signing bonus would have been split equally between the first 3 years, so 5 million each year. How they've done the deal is they've turned Conklin's signing bonus, basically created 2 fake years on the end, which means after he's finished his current contract, there's going to be a 6 million cap hit in that 4th year, the same way that Tom Brady had 13.5 million this year that the New England Patriots have to pay, even though he's actually playing for Tampa. And this is just a technique for teams that are really up against the cap. They just push that money down the road. So it's unusual that the Browns in their current cap situation would do this, but they might have some secret plan up their sleeve. So it's one that we'll see play out over the next year, next 2 years. But where that's broken down is where it's 5 years, it's split up. That's 3 million a year. So the 8 million cap number comes from the 5 million base and then the 3 million in signing bonus. But that 15 million, where it's a signing bonus, is given up front. So he's got his 5 million base, which they've fully guaranteed. And then they've got the 15 million in signing bonus. So effectively, he's got 20 million this year. That first 15 million given straight away. And then the 5 million will come as 17 game checks over the entire season, because that's how it works. So they're paid weekly, but they are moving that. So I think they're talking about spreading it 4 times a year just to help players with their budgeting and everything else.
Excellent. Thank you for breaking that down for not only me, but for our listeners. The Case Keenum numbers are official. They Over the Cap posted them today. You look, I mean, year 1 looks very solid, a $2.8 million cap hit. And then the next 2 years are very interesting at $7.3 million in 2021. Obviously, that's expected with a rising salary cap. It kind of gives him more money in his pocket as well. And then in year 3, which is 2022, he'll have a $6.8 million cap hit. So when you look at this, and I know I've heard your stance on paying backup quarterbacks, and me and Anthony talked about this as well last week. Is this a good deal in terms of, Baker's still on a cheap rookie contract? Is this okay to bring in Keenum for what the ultimate contract price was?
Yeah. So if we look at Hooper and Conklin, they're really player-friendly deals. Guarantees more or less all the money, so the player really wins massively here. With this one, it's much more of a fair balance between team friendly and player friendly, because the player's got decent money for a backup quarterback. Me personally, I would rather put that money into a player like Clinton Dix. That would be the perfect example for me. We've got a free safety that we love, or say a Dennard, a slot cornerback that is a lot better, and a sort of a lockdown slot cornerback that is going to play every snap and be a lot happier. But in terms of the structure, this is a really good structure for both sides. So the first year, 100%, he's not going anywhere because of the dead cap. Second year, he's not going anywhere because of the dead cap. But if we want to walk away after year 2, then the total number, including the dead cap that will be left there in year 3, is going to be 4 million plus that. So it's going to be 11.5 million. So that's what we'll have paid. So 2 years, 11.5 million, and then we're done, which is not bad. Puts us in a solid position, and we can walk away. And then we just got an option to make going into that 3rd year, 21st of March. There's a 1 million roster bonus. So 20th of March, we just need to make a decision. Do we keep him for that extra 6.5 million in year 3, or do we walk away? And that's something we can just decide much nearer the time. That's 6.5. Just trying to do the numbers there. Yeah. And then Case Keenum also has an option. So on the 11th of February, so that'll be a week after the Browns win the Super Bowl in 2021, Case Keenum can just void off his contract. So he can pay back $3.5 million. So part of that is going to be his 2022 signing bonus of 1.3, and then he'll pay back some more, and he'll go, actually, I want out of this deal. I'm walking away. And because if he gets a sniff from some team of going, hey, we want you, he'll go there. Baker might flop. And that's something that I don't think is going to happen, but something you've got to be prepared for. And if he's a starter going into year 2, after year 2, he's going to be going, right, pay me. I'm avoiding this contract unless you pay me. And that forces the Browns to then do a deal. So that's there just to prepare for all different options out there. And it's going to be an interesting one just to keep an eye on everything there.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Keenum with him having to pay the team back $3.5 million, I can't really see that unless, like you said, another team comes calling to his agent and said, "Hey, we want Keenum on the roster." Granted, he'll be 34 in 2 years, so who knows if anybody would really want him at that point. But I mean, money does talk, definitely, and if he has a guaranteed contract elsewhere, it would be hard to pass that up for him, especially winding down towards the end of his NFL career. Jack, I don't know if you listened last week, but me and Anthony both talked about how 2020 is really a make or break year for Baker. Would you agree or disagree?
100%. And it's something that it's really good to hear people discussing this, because I threw it out there after year one of saying, hey, let's wait until year 3 before we truly crown him the future, or we don't. And after year 1, I was like, I really do think he's the guy, but at the same time, we don't know. And I think 3 years for any player is the right amount of time before you make a decision. Obviously, I'm going to say there's an exception for someone like Patrick Mahomes. After year 2, I felt pretty good, even though he didn't play year 1, that I'm going, this is the guy. But it's still worth knowing. And what happens with Lamar Jackson? If Lamar Jackson gets an injury before year 3, or suddenly teams start playing differently about him, he might not be the great, exciting player that he is now. So I would always say, wait until the 3rd year's done before getting too excited or too downbeat on a player. That gives you a really good flavour of sort of seeing, are they going to be the guy? Because they might be a starter, but are they going to reach that elite level? Because for me, if you're not that sort of top 8 quarterback, I'd rather move on and try someone else, if I'm going to be honest. But I think Baker could do it. After year 3, if he has proved it, you pay him. If not, you play year 4, you give him the option, and then you can then decide after year 4, do you keep him, do you trade him? Because even if he's got an option at a large amount, someone's going to take the risk on him, would happily trade him and sort of see what they've got. You've then got Keenum as a backup, and you draft someone else. So I think we've got nice options there, and that's the advantage of having a rookie on a quarterback deal, because then if it doesn't work out, you can flip them, move on, and invest in someone else. What you don't want to do is be Jared Goff, where you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, you paid a guy, and he's not the real deal, because then suddenly you're paying him the same as anyone else, and quarterback market is very close together in terms of what everyone's paid. So if you've got the out and he's not the guy, you're best to walk away than tie yourself in for 4 more years and then sit there with your head in your hands wondering why you're never going to get back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at the Rams situation, they are in absolute cap hell, and part of that is giving Goff the extension, and he really kind of took a step back this past season, and now they're on the hook for him, and they really can't get out of it for I'm not sure how many years, but they're in a bad situation right now. I don't want to be in that situation with Baker. I'm confident right now that I think he can take a step forward this year, especially with the coaching staff, especially with what's around him. But if he struggles and he's an average quarterback this season, and the Browns still manage to win some games, they win 8-9 games, I still would not be so sure to give him money, because if he's not showing monumental progress, it's not worth tying into long term.
Yeah, incredibly right. And it's about keeping an open mind, because emotion can often get in the way of like, oh, this is the guy, pay him. And it's like, but is he? But also sometimes it's worth taking that jump, because if you got Joe Schobert at, say, $2 million a year less a year ago, hey, I make that payment. Now at $2 million a year more, I'm like, no, I'm all right. So you don't know the career projections. There's lots of questions, but it's best if you can make the decision early, but buy yourself time. Don't tie yourself into a bad deal that you can't get out of. And that's the risk sort of with Conklin and Hooper of like, if them guys don't perform, then you're stuck with them for 4 years, which is a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely. After the Browns made all their splash free agent signings, they signed a lot of 1-year contracts. In fact, I don't think they signed any other guys to multi-year deals after Keenum, Hooper, and Conklin. They signed B.J. Goodson, linebacker from the Packers, Carl Joseph, safety from the Raiders. They traded for Andy Janovich, the fullback from the Broncos. They signed JoJo Natson, return specialist from the Rams.
Billings.
Andrew Billings, defensive tackle from the Bengals. Donovan Olumba, a corner from Dallas. And
Kevin Joseph.
Kevin Johnson, the former first-round pick for the Texans, was with the Bills. They signed a backup center, Evan Brown, who was with the Giants. They did what I was hoping they would do. They filled. They're adding depth to the roster. They're doing it on 1-year contracts. They also added Andrew Sendejo, a veteran safety, so that I actually liked that signing. But they signed a lot of guys to 1-year contracts. They're not paying a lot of money for them. And Jared Mueller has said this time and time again on this podcast. They added the meat and potatoes to the roster, the depth. And the one thing Paul DePodesta did not want to do is pay for depth. And they didn't do that. All these are really cheap 1-year contracts. If they work out for us, great. We get these guys in the door and have the first crack at signing potential extensions with these guys. And if not, they walk away. We can cut them and it won't really hurt us in the cap. Or we let them walk next year and have a potential shot at compensatory picks. So I actually like these moves, and it also doesn't hurt us long-term flexibility when we have to pay guys like Myles Garrett and potentially Baker Mayfield, potentially Denzel Ward. Unfortunately, Browns fans, kind of lower your expectations on a Nick Chubb extension because, and I know Jack will agree with this, it's not the best move for trying to build a winning football team.
Yeah, it's just the key thing to understand with every decision, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, whether it's extensions, every single move in terms of roster building in the NFL is all about opportunity cost. And that's the key thing to understand, because every time you sign a player, that could be 1, 2, 3 other players you can't sign, you can't draft, you can't do something else. And suddenly you start hampering yourself. And that's the important thing to look at, because when I say Case Keenum's a bad signing, Case Keenum's not a bad signing. Case Keenum is potentially the best backup quarterback that a team's going to have out there. But at the same time, that's a Clinton Dix that's starting you haven't signed. That's a Denard, I forget his name, the cornerback that went to the Jags and didn't get a deal done because of language, that you haven't signed. And what would I rather have? Would I have a starter on defense in an important position, or a backup quarterback that you hope doesn't get a single snap all season? It's not a tough choice for me. So
out of the free agents, the 1-year contracts, was there a player that stood out to you like this could be a under the radar free agent signing that could really help us in 2020 and perhaps beyond?
Yeah, so I loved all these 1-year deals. The one that most excites me is Carl Joseph. I think he's a really good player. He's exciting. And if I posted this, if you'd have told me he's going to sign for a deal that is 1 year, 2.3 million before free agency started, I would have told you to stop drinking and go to bed, because I was amazed. Obviously, there is things in there, playtime, playoff incentives that can raise it another million. But still, that's an incredibly low number compared to what I expected it to be. There's per game roster bonus in there as well that can raise it a little bit. So I think at max it can go to like 3.5 or 4 million. But that's still a really, really good deal. And the thing I love about 1-year deals is there's a few benefits here. One is try before you buy. You're not invested. We're invested in Hooper for 4 years, Conklin for 3 years, Keenum for 2 years, regardless of what happens. If they're duds, we've still got them. Whereas all of these guys on defense, if they're not great, we let them go. If they're really good, we can, at the bye week, go, right, let's extend you. We're the only team they can negotiate with at that point, and we can then add more years on, sort of get a deal done. And they might go, actually, I'm going to sign this rather than test free agency, because in that second half of the season, you might get injured, and then suddenly that risk factor's gone. If we don't want them, they then become comp picks. There's another important factor is it leaves us loads of different options in the draft, because we're not just looking at this draft, we're looking at the next draft where we can go and get people to replace them, and suddenly you can move them on. So just because we pick up a a Johnson. Johnson might play really, really well at cornerback. We might also draft someone in, say, the 5th round at cornerback, and suddenly, at the end of this year, that 5th round cornerback is playing really, really well. And we might go, actually, Johnson's playing well. This cornerback is playing at 90%. Let's keep the rookie because we've got him on 3 years, literally nothing. And we're going to just turn Johnson into a 5th round comp pick. And suddenly you're then going and you're really building that roster. And if you get a really good value on, say, the 2nd or 3rd round of guy you really love and never thought would be there, but you've just signed a free agent in that position, you're suddenly like, oh, I wish we could sign this player of X position, but we signed this guy in free agency, so there's no way we can sign him. You hamstring yourself and you sort of take positions off the board, whereas give yourself the maximum freedom. And 1-year deals is a fantastic way to go if you can do it. It might just be this year that it happens, partly because of the coronavirus, everything else. We had day 1 of free agency, which was the big multi-year deals. We usually get day 2, which is sort of 2-3 year deals, no real guarantees in year 3, and there's just sort of options there. That was more or less wiped off, and it went straight to tier 3 of free agency, which is all your 1-year deals. So it wasn't just the Browns, it was everywhere. But it's an interesting one to keep an eye on of what happens next.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the big thing was I don't think teams wanted to commit to multi-year deals because of the coronavirus. The fact that you can't bring these guys in, have your team doctors do the physicals and all that. I mean, it made free agency a little bit crazy, but I loved all the 1-year deals they did. Like I said, it's good to fill depth, especially at a cheap cost. I mean, I'm looking right now, Carl Joseph and Andrew Billings would be my top 2 guys where I could see them being here past 2020. I could see them signing long term. Carl Joseph, he's that hard-hitting safety that I think Joe Woods is going to love on the back end of the secondary or the back end of the defense. If he can stay healthy, I mean, the guy's a player. He's a legit football player that you want to keep around, and he's shown it. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. Same with Billings. And I think Billings is really going to push Larry Ogunjobi. I know fans love him here. Ogunjobi hasn't been as good as people think he's been. So Billings has a shot to come in and not only take his spot, but potentially become the number 1 defensive tackle because Sheldon Richardson's not here for the long term either. I mean, as good as a player he is, he's getting older. You got to start thinking about the future, and Billings can definitely fill that void.
Yeah, no, and it's something that the upside of those deals, you're generally going to get a better player if you're offering that 1-year deal because suddenly you're going out there and you're going, hey, let's look at who's available and let's sign this guy. They want that prove-it deal, so they want the option to move on. And suddenly better players are willing to come to you for that freedom of, if I play really well in this team, makes me look good, I'm going somewhere and getting a lot more money. So that's something to keep an eye on.
So not all the contracts are up right now, but Jack, let's just say hypothetically, although it says we have 44.8 million, let's just say hypothetically we have between 30 and 35 million in cap space right now. There's still some marquee free agents out there, some that can help the Browns. Immediately comes to mind Jadeveon Clowney and Everson Griffen could help us on the edge. Obviously, if we signed one of them, we would move on from Olivier Vernon just because we're not going to have potentially 3 edge rushers at premium price. If you were Andrew Berry right now, would you rather sign Clowney at, let's just say 3 years, around 15, 16 million per year? Or are you going to go for Everson Griffen, who's been more productive as an edge rusher and would probably be cheaper, even though he's 32 years old?
So I would be only looking at a 1-year deal either way. And that's just because all that Vernon money is already spent next year because that's going straight to Myles Garrett for his 5th year option. What I would be doing with Clowney is the franchise tag for a defensive end is 17.8 million this year. I'll be picking up the phone to him and going, look, we're not even going to franchise tag you. We're going to offer you 18 million. So slightly more than that franchise tag and go, look, come play for us for 1 year. Will you trade off Vernon? Because I think someone would give us a pick. Maybe it's just a 6th. A 5th, something really late, but someone might take that on and then just have him because they know they can turn that into a comp pick next year. Then if he stays healthy, it's a win-win for them. So if you could get Clowney to come in for 1 year, I'm willing to set aside an extra $2.5 million to upgrade from Vernon to Clowney. I don't think there's a massive gap as people would assume, but obviously health is on Clowney's side, and I think the comp pick's going to be bigger for Clowney on the backside, that he can say, you bring him in, you move Vernon for a sixth, you turn Clowney into a third next year, suddenly that's great value in terms of buying comp picks, and you've paid $2.5 million to do it. So why not? It's something you definitely consider. The trouble is, if you go multi-year, you've got a lot of money tied up in that defensive end position, and PFF has come out with some really good stuff this year that just says that edge rusher isn't as valuable as most people think. Wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 is much more valuable. So if you're going to tie that money up long term, maybe Jarvis isn't the guy, but that sort of idea of a tandem of your OBJ Jarvis is a really good way to go, of put that money there, because for the same reason people say, let's invest in edge, let's invest in cornerback on defense because it affects the passing game. What affects the passing game much more is a wide receiver, and then secondly, an offensive tackle. So put the money on offense and boost Baker rather than trying to stop the opposing quarterback. So I would avoid the big multi-year deal. But no, if you can get Clowney on a sort of 1 year, $18 million, then that's certainly something I'd do. Fully guarantee it and see what he does.
Is there any other low-profile players you're looking at as potentially bringing in on a 1 year deal? I know you've mentioned Darqueze Dennard a couple times, not only on here but on Twitter as well. I particularly would like if they could get Nigel Bradham in here. I mean, linebacker is definitely a need. So they added Goodson. He's not. I wouldn't say he's a starting quality linebacker. I think you can use him in certain packages, but outside of Taki and Wilson, who are still unproven at this point, they need to get not only a veteran leader, but somebody that has had productive seasons at the linebacker position.
Yeah, so there's a couple of linebackers that intrigue me. So you mentioned one. Unfortunately, Josh Bynes went the other day, so he's gone. You said Bradham, and the other one was Awuzie. Came off a sort of poorer year last year, but has been pretty solid. So Patrick Awuzie, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, was with Baltimore last year, is someone I'd consider. The other areas I'm really looking at signing someone is we need a third edge, because the quality, there's a real lack of that sort of depth there. I don't think you go as heavy as sort of putting a Clowney, putting a Everson Griffen in there, because I think they come more as one of your starters. But there's some other guys out there. Maybe he's not played many snaps is probably the fear, but McPhee from Baltimore actually rated out quite well. There might be some other guys that's gone. Vinny Curry is definitely one I would consider going for. If he is still available. The trouble is trying to find an up-to-date list where some of these players that you don't hear much about have actually gone. But he's a 32-year-old player nearly. So if you can pick him up and then just use him as that third edge and sort of have him on that sort of 450 snaps in a year, I think you can get some real good value out of him. And he's going to be solid. I think Claiborne might still be available. So another one, he's 31.7, so same age. That's the sort of one of them two, I think would be a fantastic signing. You're only going to use them for 400 to 450, but they do have big wins. There's another name. He had a bad year last year. There's no shying away from that. But Ezekiel Ansah had 2 good years before that. But he's 30.8. So one of them 3 names would be a big signing in terms of the room and adding some real quality depth. But then suddenly you're only looking at, say, 2 to 3 million. If you could do it maybe as a 2-year deal, might not be the worst thing, just because if Vernon's moving on next year, then I would pay slightly more than you would for a 1-year deal just to get that second year in, because it's about having that depth for when people move on. Because the last thing, and the danger of having loads of players on 1-year deals, is suddenly you're trying to bring in 8 starters next year, and that's not a position you ever want to be in. But defensive edge is a big need. You mentioned linebacker. There's safety if you can find someone, but I think they're probably likely to go in the draft unless someone comes up. The final position is wide receiver. The main reason why I think it's really important to go after a wide receiver is because you've got OBJ, you've got Landry. Good chance one moves on next year. Who that is, who knows? But there is injury concerns there. And when there's injury concerns, you want to have that sort of solid backup. At the moment, the best backup is Ratley, which isn't good enough. We're going to draft a guy, and I'd be really disappointed almost if we finish day 2 of the draft and we haven't drafted a wide receiver just because it's a great class. Don't go too early, but one of those 2-3 third round picks would be really good value, and then that helps develop something there. But going and finding a name that can sort of be the guy who just backs up. So we're not looking at a superstar style player. You could go for a Higgins, but I think we could do maybe even a little bit better, but he definitely has upside. So if you can get him back to his 2018 numbers, Rashad Higgins knows the scheme. Coronavirus might be an impact here because just having someone that has that connection with Baker, if there is slightly less training time, it's a good thing to have. But just having a search out there and finding a name. But if you can get Higgins, probably take a 1-year prove-it deal, maybe have a sort of option in there. The team and player might have to sign off on it, or some sort of option that continues it on. Might be quite favourable. But yeah, he'd definitely worth a shout just to bring him back, or just some other name, not a big sexy name. Josh Gordon's obviously still available. Now the weed ban is acceptable, then maybe he is a guy worth having.
Yeah, I mean, there is some notable names out there at wide receiver right now. You mentioned Higgins, Paul Richardson. He's had the injury bug the last couple years, but he's explosive. Taylor Gabriel, who's familiar with the scheme from his time in Cleveland with Shanahan as well as in Atlanta. Just looking down the list, Demarcus Robinson still out there from Kansas City. He had a really great year, but it helps when you got Patrick Mahomes throwing you the football. I mean, there's quite a few names out there at wide receiver. You did mention Josh Gordon. I'm sure that would rile Cleveland up somewhat. He's got to get granted eligibility again by the National Football League. So you have to clear that hurdle first. But yeah, if we can get Higgins back at this point, that would be a nice option. I mean, it makes sense at this point. The only team I've seen tied to him was Buffalo, and that was a week or so ago. So right at the opening of free agency. So I would not be shocked as time progresses, Higgins ends up signing a 1-year deal and comes back.
There was a guy that I really liked the look of that we didn't sign. He's just gone to the Redskins, but Cody Lattimore was someone that I don't know what deal he's actually got, so that might change my opinion on it. But just someone like that's solid, only going to be a third. We don't even really need the upside. If you obviously get the upside and you get someone like Higgins, then fantastic. But just someone that can come in, because if you sign Higgins and then you draft someone, the draft pick comes on, Higgins comes on, it makes then moving on from one of them 2 big names much easier. If you go, actually, we're going to keep OBJ, we've got this draft pick that's really progressing nicely, and we've got Higgins, who we've just signed to a, let's say, $15 million 3-year deal, so $5 million a year. Then you're in a really nice position with that room that you've got lots of talented options. You've only really got 2 on the field for large amounts, but even that third one out there, you're still comfortable. It just gives you a nice option to comfortably move on from whether it's OBJ, whether it's Landry. And options is the big important thing to have. And the more sort of cohesion you build with Baker and wide receivers, the better everything, fingers crossed, should be.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little draft. The NFL decided on Thursday night that the draft will still go on April 23rd through the 25th. It sounds like they're going to do it in a TV studio. You know, the glitz and glamour that they were hoping for in Vegas is not going to happen because of the coronavirus. And Goodell made an interesting comment that he said that no one should publicly criticize our decision, or they're on grounds to be reprimanded by the league. And I think that's a little ridiculous. And I know some of the GMs have already spoken out before Goodell said that. Obviously, this is a difficult time for GMs, for the scouting departments, because There's no pro days. You can't bring guys in for workouts or for visits. You can't go to their schools to do workouts. I mean, it's a different time for everybody now, and especially for them as they prepare for the draft. Jack, are you shocked that they're still rolling along business as usual towards the draft? And how do you think GMs and the scouts are trying to prepare for this right now, which is obviously a different time for them?
I love it because it's going to see a massive increase in analytics across the NFL. So it might mean that a team like the Browns slightly loses their edge, but I think for the betterment of sport, I think it's going to be really good because whereas they relied on certain other stuff, there's a lot more reliance have to go into the data and what they know. I don't know sort of the decisions been taken behind the scenes, but I'm guessing they've sort of, whereas teams are able to bring them in and certain players, that they can sort out sort of Zoom calls or something like that with all the prospects and sort of have a lot more time with them, but it's online calls rather than in person. They can set up sort of the whiteboard and things, so that's something there. But no, it's interesting sort of how it's going to play out. I'm really happy it's going on personally because it's something to watch. I've already got my day booked off because it doesn't start till I think it's going to be like 1 o'clock on Friday morning, the first round. So yeah, the day's booked off work. I'm looking forward to it. I have it circled in the calendar, and I roll on with it. Is my view. And no one's at risk. Yes, teams lose out more data and sort of bringing players in and more research, but no one's at an unfair advantage due to that.
Do you think teams will shy away more from guys coming off injuries and guys with character concerns because they don't get the added time now to really dive in and do their homework on these guys? I know that, they're allowed 3 1-hour interviews via video teleconferences during each week. So like say for the Browns, for instance, Andrew Berry could interview 3 guys this week. That's it. But do you think it'll shy away from guys with character and injuries, most notably Tua Tagovailoa, who's obviously coming off the hip injury? They have the medical reports from the combine, but that's it. Like they don't really get to go more in depth on that.
Yeah, I think it's one that when I look at someone like Dave Gettleman as a GM, does that guy even understand what's going on? Probably not. And he doesn't seem to take much interest in data or facts and things when deciding who to pick. So I don't think it will affect too much. There might be some of the smarter teams that steer away from stuff, but from a player angle, the fact that free agency went on was massive because where these players might not have got their money or something changes down the line, they got paid. And if you're a player, you want that to go ahead, and the NFLPA was really keen on pushing for it. And the same thing with the draft. If this gets moved back, then some players might drop because something else happens, or say the draft got moved back a month and someone gets injured in that month, suddenly they might lose 10 million. And just as simple as that, these things happen. But no, for me, I think teams will still take a risk just because lots of GMs, they're always on the hot seat, or coaches are on the hot seat. So they want to make that splash play. Playing safe isn't good enough because if they play it safe, 4 or 5 of them will get sacked anyway. So lots of GMs, there's not as much of a long-term plan. It's go and be bold. A team like the New England Patriots that are quite settled, they probably don't have to be as risky because there's no fear that Bill Belichick's going to get sacked for one bad season or one bad move.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's definitely going to be something to watch how teams, including the Browns, are going to approach this draft as we get closer. Adam Schefter was on, I think it was Golick and Wingo. I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday. They were talking about the draft, whether it was going to go on or not. And he threw out an interesting idea that'll attract viewers, get fans watching. And he said, take the draft, which is currently 3 days, and turn it into a whole week with a round each day. And it's very interesting. I'd be really intrigued as to how the NFL would approach it, how they would lay it all out. I don't know how likely it is. It seems like they're still going to go with just the 3 days, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. Jack, what did you think of Schefter's idea, and do you have your own idea as how you would try to twist the draft up to try to get people to watch?
Yeah, so firstly, it looks like the league's going ahead with 3 days based on like all their reports have said that it starts this day, ends that day. So I think they've been pretty hard line with it. I don't know the sort of viewing numbers generally for sort of day 3 of the draft. I'm guessing it's a lot lower, but it's one that who knows, more information might come out. But where the timing's there, people are going to watch. People want entertainment, so it's going to be there. I think it's a bit bold, Schefter, to say like round 7 gets its own day because, hey, draft nuts like us two would love it. The general population, maybe it's a great time to bring lots of people into the draft, how it works, and sort of a lot more interest in building, not just around the draft, but roster building and sort of having 7 days really focused on it. I think a better fix would be keep round 1 by itself, do round 2 and round 3 by themselves because they're big enough rounds. There's big sort of, obviously I don't really watch college being in the UK, but there's what I would consider sort of being semi-household names for you guys over there. Like people are going to know prospects that are going in that sort of 2nd and 3rd round, and then group 4 and 5, group 6 and 7. So have it over 5 days, split day 2 in half, split day 3 in half, and suddenly you've got 5 days of content. You still keep it at decent speed in sort of day 5, but you just sort of break it into half. And I think 5-day draft would be an excellent idea, and it just gives more content. I'll take more days off work, which I'm more than happy to do. And yeah, why not? It's exciting times.
Yeah, for me personally, I miss the old days where it was on Saturday and Sunday. Now it started at Saturday at noon, and you had rounds 1, 2, and 3 all day Saturday. It went on to like 8 or 9 o'clock, sometimes even later because sometimes the first round would drag on. And then you'd start back up Sunday at noon with the 4th round and go all the way through the end. I loved that. And when they moved to prime time, I kind of didn't like it at first. I like it now. But if they went back to that way where you just had the whole weekend to enjoy the draft, I wouldn't be mad about that scenario going back to.
Well, for me, it kicks off at like 1 a.m. on Friday morning for the first round. So that finishes at like, I think it's 4 in the morning. Then I sleep, take a half day of work at holiday, work from home usually in the afternoon. And then on the second day, I think it's something like 11 o'clock rather than quite as late UK time. And then perfect timing on the Saturday because I can go and watch the football, which runs 3 till 5, and get home at 5 o'clock. And then, or as you would call it, soccer, and then go straight from non-league soccer straight into the NFL draft day 3. So the timings usually work great. We're on lockdown this year, so I don't think it will make the blindest bit of difference. My sleep pattern's gone out the window. But yeah, any extra days in the draft, more days of enjoyment, more days of talking about it, I'm here for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the NFL is going to be happy because I feel like they're going to have record viewership this year because everybody's going to be at home and there's nobody converging on a city. Everybody's going to be surrounding their TVs or watching it on their mobile devices. The draft's going to have huge ratings. I'm going to go ahead and say that now just because people are craving sports. There is no sports going on. So the NFL draft, I think, is going to be huge for them in terms of TV ratings this year.
Yeah, and I think you're going to get new fans buying into the sport that have never really bought in before and taken an interest. And if they see a prospect they like in the draft and then they suddenly start following that team and stuff like that, is going to make a difference because fans are just crying out for anything. And yeah, why not? It introduces you to a new sport. You see a new side. And it's something, especially in terms of the UK, players getting drafted to play sport is not something that is very common at all.
So, Jack, I haven't asked you, do you have a prospect that you are warming up to right now for with the 10th pick? Or are you still kind of looking at who's going to be available and who you like?
It's offensive tackle or trade down. So not Mekhi Becton. No offense to the guy, he's probably is watching like the odd bits of combine tape, one of the most incredible physical specimens you're ever going to see, but I don't think he fits a fancy wide zone scheme. And as well, he didn't really ever play that many pass snaps in college. PFF did the numbers and it was shocking how low it was. I think some even people like Daniel Jeremiah tweeted it and was like, surely he played more. And it was like, nope. And that was surprisingly low. So he's off my board. But whether it's someone like Wirfs, whether it's someone like Thomas, anyone that can play left tackle, I'm fine with that. Or just trade down, because there's not any positions. There's 3 positions I'd draft in the first round. Quarterback, we don't need one. Defensive end, there's not one that's going to be there that's worth that pick. Or offensive tackle. If you're not getting one of those 3, trade down, because you could say add a two second round picks, for example, and suddenly, what would I rather have this year? 2 second round picks and then draft 2 players, or Isaiah Simmons, someone like that. I'd rather have the 2 second round picks. So definitely consider that trade down. Whether it's, say, a later first and you add a first next year, happy days. I'll certainly be up for that. But no, trade down should definitely be on the table if they don't like the offensive tackle. And I'm happy to sit there and relax. And whichever offensive tackle they want to take, I'm cool with that, because there's lots of stuff. And I always say as a fan, the draft is a difficult time because you don't really know what goes into that full decision, what their plan is. But I trust the front office. And it comes down to, if you trust the front office, sit back, enjoy it. I'll question moves that I don't like, but no, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the draft.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that one. For me right now, I like Andrew Thomas out of Georgia, and I like Tristan Wirfs. But I'm warming up to trading down. Getting some extra day 2 picks would be great. If we can move down a couple spots, gain some extra picks, and then take a Josh Jones or a Urza Cleveland, and then open the door to potentially bringing in Jason Peters on a 1-year deal for cheap, and let either one of those guys sit behind him until they're ready. That'd be like a best case scenario. And you still add extra picks. You can go get safety, go get a linebacker or an edge rusher or something. But I really like Wirfs and Thomas. They're my top 2 tackles. The only way I'd move down is if both of them are gone, or there's just a trade offer you can't pass up.
There was a really interesting thing on. So PFF Forecast is very much your data, really deep dive data stuff that PFF do. And they did a first round mock using analytics. So obviously no chance of running back, but much more interest in positions like wide receiver. They didn't actually include Wirfs in the entire first round, which I found really fascinating. And they went into some stuff about, and they just used their projection models of like who they reckon is going to be the best people to take. And they had some other tackles in there, but Wirfs, obviously all the sort of the tape guys and everything, he's in there, but for them, he wasn't. So it's something really interesting to see. Will we sort of get a better idea moving forward? But it wouldn't surprise me if Wirfs isn't as high on the Browns board, just looking at what PFF have come out with. So one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I'm sure we will. The picture will become clearer within the next 27 days. We're 27 days away from the draft. That's crazy. Jack, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast tonight. Most importantly, stay healthy, stay safe, stay at home. I know you've already been doing that. So, praying for you and Paul and everybody over there in the United Kingdom. Go ahead and plug your Twitter, plug anything you got going on, and we'll get on out of here.
So my Twitter's at Jack Duffin, JackDuffin. DMs are always open, so any cap questions come up, any little bits, then feel free to just jump in there and ask me the question. And my writing's done at dog.land, so that's Jack and Anthony's site, so definitely check that out. Haven't done anything sort of post-free agency yet. I'm just waiting for everything to settle down before we get a really good picture, but I will do a catch-up pre-draft, write some bits. It's just I want that full picture before I write, and sometimes some of the early numbers can be misleading, so just waiting until they're all finalised and out there. But no, massive thank you to the lads. They do some great work, and it's really fun being a part of it.
Yeah, man, thank you for what you do. You put out some great content. I get smarter every time I read your stuff about the cap and everything that's going on, so thank you for what you do. As always, everyone, thank you for listening. Check us out at dog.land or thedogland.com. Follow me on Twitter at JackMcCurry08. Follow Anthony at AnthonyJokey. And with that, until next time, go Browns.